Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is arguably the best point-and-click adventure. Stop! Sorry, old bean, I can't let you do that. You can't let me do the review? Frightfully sorry, old fellow, but I can't let just anyone review this ancient masterpiece. Curse you, Professor Charles Sternhardt. It's enough to make you want to wish death on... oh. Get off my lawn! LucasArts are known for two things: brilliant Star Wars games and brilliant point-and-click adventure titles. Sorry, we're known for. Thanks, terrible management structure. Point-and-click was an evolution of the text parser games of the 70s like Adventureland, Zork, and the witty Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They turned into a halfway home of typing in commands with rudimentary graphics like the early 80s Sierra titles, before becoming the mouse-based interactive environments they remain to this day. Lucasfilm Games, soon to be renamed LucasArts, had access to the licenses of their parent company's movies, as evidenced by their video game tie-in to Labyrinth. Oh, and TIE Fighter, because I don't mention that enough already. Their first point-and-click adventure title wasn't original though. 1987's B-movie inspired Maniac Mansion, released on a variety of platforms to critical acclaim, using the newly formed script creation utility for Maniac Mansion, which was my kind of scum, fearless and inventive. The humor continued with the wacky sci-fi Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders the year after, and then came Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure. Not the action game of the same name, or the console game. It mostly follows the plot of the movie and was a massive success for the company, selling over 250,000 copies. However, as with other titles, it was the first wave of scum games and had no voice acting and limited audio and color. It was very much a product of a time that was soon to be left behind as computers moved into the multimedia age of the 90s. LucasArts released Loom, The Secret of Monkey Island, signaling a shift to a new style of graphic adventure full of sound and color. While critically adored, none of these titles sold particularly well, so clearly it was time to repeat the success of The Last Crusade. Now, which indie film came after The Last Crusade? With most of LucasArts busy with these other original titles, the sequel fell to Hal Barwood, a cinema veteran from the 70s. He had only designed 2 games before on the Apple II, one self-published and the other never released. With no new indie film on the horizon, LucasArts instead provided him with a rejected script from the unfilmed Indiana Jones and the Monkey King circa 1985, penned by Chris Columbus. It had a guerrilla army taking over a 3-story Nazi tank as Indy rides a rhino into battle, brought about by the prospect of magical peaches. Harwood was tasked with adapting a point-and-click adventure game from that. His response was to rightly declare the script substandard and start from scratch instead, working alongside one of the previous title's designers and LucasArts mainstay Noah Falstein. Together they headed to Skywalker Ranch and visited George Lucas's library for inspiration, finally settling upon Atlantis as the subject of Indy's latest adventure and not letting George interject with his crazy ideas. After heavy research into the topics and themes they were plotting around, Barwood applied the same approach to the design team, regularly altering the direction of the art until he was happy, with fully rotoscoped video footage for animation and a narrative edition we'll come to later that added a whopping 6 months of development time. All in all, it took 2 years for the game to be finished and a further year to release the enhanced talkie edition with thousands of voiced lines of dialogue. Original actor Harrison Ford didn't want to be involved in some stupid he was unavailable, so Doug Lee stood in, providing a good impersonation that was actually aided by the limited audio quality of the time. Like the titles that came before it, Fate of Atlantis was also written on the Scum engine, which means that nowadays it can run on Scum VM, an open source re-implementation of the script interpretation language used by LucasArts. What this provides us with is better performance and in-game menu options, a new saving system and a whole host of visual and audio tweaks. We have a choice of MT32, AdLib or MIDI for music playback, including built-in sound font support and scaling options. There's plenty of documentation online about how to use it, so I won't get too technical. Being a LucasArts game from the early 90s, Fate of Atlantis benefits from the same innovative iMuse engine that TIE Fighter has. iMuse stands for Interactive Music Streaming Engine and synchronizes the MIDI output to match the events on screen, providing a seamless looping background score. Engine creator Michael Land was joined by his team of in-house composers Peter McConnell and Clint Bajakian, who penned a spectacular 3-hour score that runs the emotional gamut from jaunty and music to dark and atmospheric. It certainly didn't help that it already had motifs pre-written by legendary composer John Williams. You may know him from everything. The opening credits of the game are playable, with their interactivity serving as a tutorial for both newcomers and people who aren't used to operating adventure games with a mouse in a graphical environment. It's also fun watching Indy fall. This is followed by a nice setup of our main villain and a brief conversation between Indy and Marcus about the essential plot elements. What's handy about this sequence for returning players is that the whole thing can be skipped and Indy will start in the opening location complete with a brief expository monologue of his own that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Well, here I am in New York wondering how Sophia Hapgood got mixed up with Nazi spies.
Thanks, Indy. The map screen is taken right from the movies, transporting you from hub to hub without ever giving you too many destinations to keep track of, and informing you about what part of the world Indy is heading to next, and also if your attempts to get there are haphazard and terrible. New York is where you're introduced to the action and inventory bar at the bottom of the screen. If you right-click on a selectable part of the environment, it will default Indy to one of those actions, meaning you don't have to go and select something from the action bar each time, though Indy is unlikely to do anything rash by default other than look at an object or speak to the person in question. It's pretty self-explanatory, with the Use button being the only one that might cause some trouble. Use allows you to apply an item from your inventory with an object or person on the screen, or combine it with another item that you're holding, though Indy will prevent you from dipping your bullwhip into a jar of old mayonnaise, despite it being the obvious course of action.
I don't think that'll work.
A brief chat with an off-screen ticket taker provides you with the branching dialogue system, and your interaction with the intellectual giant Biff the Doorman expands upon that and gives you your first fight. Or not. If you'd rather be stealthy, you can manipulate a series of boxes in order to gain entrance to the show. Fighting can be done on the numeric keypad or the mouse, and consists of blocking and punching, featuring health and power meters. It's rudimentary, but not without its charm. A nice mini-game that's largely optional. There's also the ability to sucker punch using the insert or zero keys, but some enemies can't be knocked out this way, so it's better to avoid fighting altogether if you hate it, which you can do by cowardly running away.
I'm tired of running, but not that tired.
Give up, Jones. There's no escape.
Unlike most LucasArts adventure games, you can die in Fate of Atlantis, and the death screen pops up with a bio of the person who killed you. This is reminiscent of contemporary Sierra titles like King's Quest VI that were notorious for killing you in hundreds of evil ways. Fortunately, there's far fewer ways to perish here, and they largely come about as a result of your own stupidity. However you end up getting through the back door, you're soon greeted with your first puzzle, a simple lever system to activate the ghost of Nurab Sal. The results are entertaining and introduce us to the feisty Sophia Hapgood, a former associate of Dr. Jones turned psychic, who can't decide if she loves or loathes the man. After more conversation, we're off to Iceland together, and it soon becomes clear that we need to uncover an old translated manuscript from Plato called the Lost Dialogue. This is one of the first curveballs that the game will throw at you, because the location of the dialogue is randomized for each playthrough. This is one of several elements that vary in order to provide increased replayability. Luckily for me, I was able to find mine in the same location as my last run of the game. No, I'm not telling you where, find your own. There are two ways of playing an adventure game: being puzzled by the various components and figuring things out yourself over time, or having a good walkthrough handy by your side and instead enjoying the story, while pretending that you're not cheating, which you are. At the end of the first act, you're presented with the choice that the developers spent 6 additional months making possible. After reading your fortune, Sophia will provide you with 3 distinct options at Barnett College depending on how you completed the previous puzzles. To have her continue to be with you on your adventure as your companion and figure things out as a team, to go it alone and use your wits to overcome the puzzles ahead, or to become the one-man action hero and go Rocky Balboa on some Nazis and get concussions galore.
I've got a message for Colonel Kerner. Let me pass.
I'll deliver it myself. What's the message?
Go tell Kerner there's an idiot guarding the door.
The game's second act will alter itself according to your choice. The locations will be the same, but the layouts and environments, including the people you interact with and the order you visit things, will change. A quick example of the more subtle differences is our time in Algiers. As you can see, while the backdrop isn't altered, there are changes already. Most adventure games have a single narrative with fixed environments, so this provides several hours of additional content and puzzles for a second and third playthrough. What wasn't as entertaining were the shoehorned clicker mini-games like driving a car or using a balloon or even riding a camel. The most poorly implemented of these was when you had to follow a dot in a sea of other dots, most likely fail, then do it all over again with a different dot in order to convince the first dot to change colour so you could follow it a second time. Then there was the thrilling saga of Indiana Jones, French signpost and drain inspector. Look out for the Nazi fire hydrant, Indy! The undeniable influence of Cretan proceedings means that arriving there was inevitable regardless of the path you choose, and it's here a giant coincidence occurs that I cannot leave untouched. In my previous video for Free Space, I advertised Knossos, a mod manager. Well, it got its name from the Minoan city of Knossos. And where does Jones end up visiting? You guessed it. Each locale you visit is rendered by a series of beautiful pixel art backdrops, and there were times I'd stop playing altogether and just get lost in the evocative imagery. You really are a wartime adventurer unearthing treasures in a place where our limited understanding of science and history made it feel like anything was possible, except peace with the Nazis. Our bad guys are typical indie fodder if you've seen the films. A mad scientist and his Nazi accomplice who wants to uncover Atlantis and use its secret powers to rule the world. Yeah, we should probably stop that. There's a reason that this game is frequently referred to as Indiana Jones 4. That's because the quality of the dialogue and settings in tandem are so good that it should have been a movie, instead of what we got, which was nothing, as a fourth Indiana Jones movie never existed, okay? The level of detail in the historical backdrop is weaved deftly with intriguing conspiracies and fantastical elements to keep the player engaged in the setting. The fiercely entertaining dialogue allows you to play the role of dry-witted skeptic,
Ach, ein Interloper.
Pardon me, I'm the cave inspector.
conspiracy theorist,
So you completely discount the supernatural?
fence-sitting academic,
Actually, I'm just a simple professor.
or just a man who enjoys insulting and punching others.
Are you a sub-captain or merely subhuman? Looks like I'm captain now. You probably wouldn't fit anyway.
Was that a crack about my weight?
All while still believably being Indiana Jones.
While you're standing there, let me show you a magic trick I learned.
A large chunk of this dialogue comes from Sophia Hapgood, a perfect blend of Marion Ravenwood, Willie Scott, and Jones himself. She's morally ambiguous, a true believer not only in Atlantis but in the spirit she claims to be possessed by. Fiercely independent, yet also vulnerable, she's a well-written foil for Indy who regularly bickers with him throughout the adventure, and for this reason alone I suggest you play the team path first, as it seems like the one the developers worked on the most. Whether you're an obnoxious pig, a violent psychopath, a mild-mannered scholar with a taste for adventure, or all three at once, eventually you'll uncover the true fate of Atlantis. And in case it isn't obvious by now, it would be a massive letdown to call your game The Fate of Atlantis, and litter it with Atlantean artifacts without actually taking Indy to Atlantis. So, spoiler alert for a 27-year-old game, you do, one way or another. Thus begins the third and final act, as all paths from the second act converge. Atlantis itself is much like how Sophia described it in her show at the beginning, a network of free rings that get more difficult as you progress. Within them you'll find the most fiendish puzzles the game has to offer, as the story culminates in a suitably grand fashion with different outcomes depending on your choices. If you've any interest in a well-told story, the Indiana Jones films, Atlantis itself, or point-and-click adventure games, then this one is a must. Over the last 10 years, LucasArts and Double Fine have remastered several of these classic adventure games. Unfortunately, Fate of Atlantis was not among them, so we're stuck with the poorer voice quality and the original pixelated graphics without any widescreen support. A fan remake was attempted called the Special Edition, and while this was clearly a labour of love, you didn't need to own the original assets to run the title. As a result, the team can't release the full remake without falling foul of legal trouble, and a demo is all that's available. So if you don't mind the aged presentation and can live with a classic classic adventure game action and inventory bar, the rest of this title holds up remarkably well. This is partly due to the fact that its genre, much like the space combat games LucasArts were also famous for, died in the 2000s. This time it was a translation to 3 dimensions that came at the expense of their charm, a fate that Indy never suffered, as his character was a perfect fit for an action-adventure game in the vein of Tomb Raider, a franchise he clearly inspired. He found new life in 1999's Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, also written by Harwood. To date, Fate of Atlantis is still LucasArts' best-selling adventure game, even if other titles released around the same era garner more nostalgic recollection for their original characters and settings. Here's hoping that Disney sees some value in remastering this classic, because even with the passage of time, this artifact still shines as brightly as Orichalcum. I hope that's not you I see skulking behind the fence with a bullwhip and a spade. If you even think of digging this soil for treasure, I'll demand that you get off my lawn.